That night stayed in my mind long after everyone left the dinner table. I went to the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. The red stain from the wine was spreading across my dress, but it wasn't the dress that hurt me. It was the way Daniel looked at me when he told me to apologize. I remember standing there, holding a paper towel, trying to clean the stain. My hands were shaking. I kept asking myself how things had reached this point. When we first got married, Daniel wasn't like this. He used to listen to me. He used to care about my feelings. Somewhere along the way, that man disappeared. When we drove home that night, the car was completely silent. Rachel had already left with the rest of the family. I expected Daniel to say something, maybe that the evening had gotten out of control or that Rachel had gone too far. But he didn't. After a few minutes, he simply said, "You should have just ignored her, Emily. You know how Rachel is." That sentence hurt more than the wine incident itself. I turned my face toward the window and watched the streetlights pass by. In that moment I realized something very clear. Daniel didn't see what Rachel was doing to me as a problem. To him, it was normal. He expected me to accept it and stay quiet. When we got home, he walked straight upstairs without another word. I stayed in the kitchen for a long time, sitting at the table in silence. The house felt strangely cold that night. For years I had been trying to make this marriage work. I adjusted my behavior, ignored the insults, and convinced myself that patience would fix everything. I believed that one day Daniel would finally understand how much his sister was hurting our relationship. But that night made something painfully clear. He already knew. And he didn't care enough to change it. After that dinner, things didn't improve. If anything, Rachel's behavior became even more bold. She started coming to our house almost every day without calling first. Sometimes she arrived early in the morning, sometimes late in the evening. It felt like she believed our home belonged to her. Whenever she walked in, she immediately started pointing out things she didn't like. If the living room wasn't arranged the way she preferred, she moved the furniture. If the kitchen wasn't organized according to her standards, she began rearranging the cabinets. One afternoon I came home from work and found her in my kitchen, opening drawers and moving my dishes around. I politely asked what she was doing. She smiled and said she was fixing the mess. Daniel was sitting in the living room while this happened. When I looked at him, hoping he would say something, he simply shrugged and said Rachel was only trying to make the house better. It wasn't just the house. Rachel had opinions about everything in my life. She criticized the clothes I wore, the job I worked, and even the way I spoke during family gatherings. If I tried to defend myself, Daniel would quickly step in and tell me not to start an argument. Slowly, I noticed something painful happening. Daniel began repeating Rachel's complaints as if they were his own thoughts. If she said I wasn't organized enough, he said the same thing later. If she said I wasn't supportive enough as a wife, Daniel started questioning my efforts too. It felt like I was standing alone against both of them. I tried to stay calm because I believed arguing would only make things worse. I told myself that families sometimes go through difficult periods and that patience might bring peace back into our home. But every week Rachel's control over our lives grew stronger. She made decisions about plans, holidays, and even how Daniel spent his time. Meanwhile, my voice slowly disappeared from my own marriage. A few weeks later, something happened that I never expected. One quiet afternoon I was sitting at the kitchen table, paying our monthly bills. I had always been the one who kept track of our expenses, so I logged into our bank account the way I usually did. At first everything looked normal. But when I checked our savings account, the number immediately caught my attention. The balance was much lower than I remembered. For a moment I thought I might be mistaken, so I checked the previous statements. That was when I saw it. Several large transfers had been made over the past 2 months. Each one was sent to the same account. I didn't recognize the number at first, but when I looked closer, I realized whose account it was. Rachel's. The total amount was thousands of dollars. My chest felt tight as I stared at the screen. That money wasn't extra cash. It was the savings we had been putting aside for years. We had talked many times about using it to move into a bigger house one day. I waited until Daniel came home from work that evening. When he walked into the living room, I calmly asked him about the missing money. At first he looked surprised that I knew. Then his expression quickly changed. Instead of explaining, he simply said Rachel had been struggling and needed help. I asked why he hadn't talked to me about it first. After all, it was our savings. Daniel's voice immediately became defensive. He said Rachel was family and that helping her was the right thing to do. When I pointed out how much money had disappeared, he frowned and told me I was overreacting. Then he said something that stayed with me for a long time. He told me I should stop being selfish because Rachel needed the money more than we did. In that moment, something inside me went quiet. I finally began to understand where I truly stood in his life. Not long after that, Daniel's parents invited the whole family over for dinner. I tried to stay positive before going. I told myself that maybe the evening would be calm and that everyone would simply enjoy the time together. When we arrived, the house was already full. Daniel's parents welcomed us, and several relatives were sitting around the table talking. Rachel was there too, smiling like everything was normal. At first, the evening started quietly. Everyone sat down for dinner and began talking about work and daily life. I helped bring the food to the table and tried to stay polite with everyone. But after a while, Rachel started making small comments about me. She looked at the dish I brought and said it didn't look very good. A few people at the table went quiet. I tried to ignore it and kept eating. Then she laughed and said Daniel must be tired of eating food like that every day. Some relatives looked uncomfortable, but no one said anything. Rachel didn't stop there. She started talking about my job, saying it wasn't impressive and that Daniel deserved a wife who could do better. Then she looked at my clothes and joked that I should ask her for fashion advice. I felt my face getting warm as everyone listened. I slowly turned to Daniel, hoping he would tell her to stop. I didn't expect a big argument. I just wanted him to stand up for me. Instead, he smiled and chuckled like it was all harmless. That moment hurt more than the comments themselves. I finally asked Rachel calmly to stop speaking about me like that. But she suddenly acted offended, as if I had attacked her. She grabbed her glass and carelessly tipped it, sending red wine across the front of my dress. Gasps came from around the table. Before I could even react, Rachel accused me of ruining the evening by starting drama. Then Daniel looked at me and told me I should apologize so everyone could move on. I sat there in silence, feeling smaller than I ever had before. After that night, I didn't argue anymore. I didn't try to explain my feelings or defend myself. Something inside me had become very quiet. Daniel seemed to notice the change, but he misunderstood it. He probably thought I had finally accepted the situation. From his point of view, the house became calmer. There were no more long discussions or uncomfortable questions. I simply went about my daily routine. But inside, my thoughts had completely changed. For the first time in years, I stopped thinking about how to fix our marriage. Instead, I started thinking about how to protect myself and my future. One morning on my way to work, I stopped by a bank branch near my office. I opened a personal account in my own name. It felt strange at first because Daniel and I had always shared our finances. But I knew I needed something that belonged only to me. From that day on, I began setting aside small amounts of money whenever I could. It wasn't much at the beginning, but it was a start. At work, I also began paying more attention to opportunities. Before, I often turned down extra projects because I wanted to spend more time at home. Now I accepted them. I stayed later, worked harder, and focused on improving my position. Each step made me feel a little stronger. At home, nothing seemed different on the surface. Daniel continued living his normal life, completely unaware of the decisions I had started making. We still shared the same space, but the emotional connection between us felt weaker every day. I stopped expecting kindness or support from him. Instead, I quietly built the independence I should have had long ago. Deep down, I had already accepted a difficult truth. The marriage I once believed in no longer existed. And even though Daniel didn't realize it yet, my life was slowly moving in a direction where he would no longer be part of it. A few weeks later, another situation appeared that made the atmosphere in the house even more difficult. One evening Daniel came home and told me Rachel was having problems with her apartment. He said she needed a place to stay for a short time. Before I could even ask questions, he explained that she would move into our house for a while. It was clear the decision had already been made. He spoke about it as if it were a normal arrangement. Rachel arrived the following weekend with several bags and boxes. She walked through the house like she had already lived there for years. She chose the guest room and began unpacking without asking if anything needed to be discussed first. At the beginning, Daniel repeated the same sentence again and again. He said it would only be temporary and that I should be patient until Rachel got back on her feet. But living with her every day quickly became exhausting. Rachel treated the house as if she were the person in charge. She woke up early and walked around inspecting things. If she didn't like how something was arranged, she moved it. If the kitchen wasn't exactly the way she wanted, she started giving instructions. Sometimes she sat in the living room and openly complained about small things. She talked about how the house could be cleaner or how meals could be prepared differently. Daniel rarely reacted to any of it. Most of the time he acted like the situation was completely normal. Evenings became uncomfortable. Rachel often stayed close to Daniel, talking to him about different things while I sat quietly nearby. It felt like I was slowly becoming a guest in my own home. Daniel kept saying that everything would improve once Rachel solved her problems and moved out. But as the days passed, I noticed something important. The longer she stayed, the more distant I felt from both of them. Instead of feeling like a family, the house started to feel like a place where I no longer truly belonged. One evening, I was passing by the kitchen on my way to grab a glass of water when I overheard Rachel talking to Daniel. At first, I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe I had misheard. But as I stopped behind the door, it became clear she was speaking about me. She told Daniel that I wasn't good enough for him, that he deserved someone richer, prettier, and more impressive. Her voice was calm but sharp, like she believed every word was a fact. My chest tightened as I listened. I looked at Daniel, expecting him to respond, to defend me, to say that what she was saying was wrong. But he didn't. He just stayed quiet. He didn't argue, didn't try to explain, didn't even look upset. He simply listened. That silence hit me harder than any insult Rachel had ever thrown my way. It wasn't her words that stung the most. It was Daniel's complete acceptance of them, the fact that he didn't care how cruel she sounded. That moment revealed the truth I had been avoiding for so long. I realized he had never truly respected me, not even once in the years we had been married. All those times I had tried to communicate, tried to explain my feelings, tried to ask for his support, it hadn't mattered. He had always allowed Rachel's opinions to outweigh mine. I felt a mix of sadness and anger building inside me. All the small betrayals, the quiet dismissals, the way he prioritized her over me, they weren't just incidents. They were a pattern. A pattern that I had ignored for far too long because I wanted to believe in the man I had married. Hearing those words in that quiet kitchen made me understand one thing clearly: my marriage was never equal. From the start, I had been a secondary part of his life, and Rachel had always been the priority. That night, the truth was undeniable. And with that realization, I knew it was time to stop waiting for him to change. It was time to stop hoping for respect that would never come. After realizing the truth about Daniel and Rachel, I decided not to confront them anymore. I knew arguing would change nothing, and I didn't want to waste my energy on people who would never respect me. Instead, I focused on myself and my future. At work, I began taking on more responsibilities. I accepted a better position that came with higher pay and more independence. Every project I completed reminded me that I was capable of far more than they had ever allowed me to believe. I started to feel a sense of control over my life again, and it was liberating. Alongside that, I carefully started saving money in my private account. I cut small expenses and prioritized my future over the temporary comforts that had tied me to the house. Each deposit I made felt like a small victory, a quiet step toward freedom. I also began looking for a new place to live. I found a beautiful apartment across town, one that felt completely mine. I visited it secretly, imagining how it would feel to walk through the door knowing it was my space, my rules, my life. I made arrangements quietly, making sure Daniel and Rachel would never know until I was ready. At home, I continued living calmly, without drawing attention to what I was doing. Daniel and Rachel believed they still had control over every aspect of my life. They didn't notice that I had stopped depending on Daniel for anything and that I was quietly creating a life that didn't include either of them. The more I prepared, the lighter I felt. It was the first time in years that I wasn't anxious or fearful. Instead of waiting for respect or care that would never come, I had begun taking it for myself. By the time I was ready to leave, I felt stronger than I had in years. I had built a plan, secured my independence, and discovered the piece that had been missing for so long. Daniel and Rachel never suspected that their control was already slipping away. I was ready to step into a new life, free from the constant humiliation and betrayal that had defined my marriage. The morning I decided to leave, I woke up earlier than usual. Daniel and Rachel had already left the house for the day, giving me the quiet I needed. I went from room to room, collecting my things, making sure I had everything I would need. I packed my clothes, my personal items, and a few sentimental things I couldn't leave behind. Each item I placed in my bag felt like shedding a part of the past that had weighed me down for so long. I didn't rush, but I moved with a quiet determination, knowing this was the moment I had been preparing for months. Once I was done, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a simple letter. I explained my reasons calmly and clearly, without anger or accusations. I wanted Daniel to understand, but I didn't want to argue or cause more conflict. I placed the letter on the table along with the house keys. It was a quiet, final gesture, a way to close one chapter and begin another. Before leaving, I double-checked my bag and my apartment keys, making sure I had everything I needed. I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of nervousness and relief. I knew that walking out would be the first real step toward reclaiming my life, toward being independent in every way. I left the house quietly, locking the door behind me. The morning air felt fresh, and I realized how long it had been since I had felt this sense of freedom. There were no arguments, no shouting, no scenes, just a calm, deliberate decision to put myself first. By the time Daniel and Rachel returned, I was gone. My phone was off, and there was no way for them to reach me. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. I was finally free from the constant tension, the humiliation, and the betrayal. Walking away that morning, I didn't feel fear. I felt strength. Every step I took toward my new apartment was a step into a life where I could finally live for myself. A life where respect and dignity were mine to keep, and where no one's control could touch me again. Weeks passed after I left, and life on my side slowly settled into a calm rhythm. I had a place of my own now, a home that belonged only to me. I decorated it the way I liked, cooked my meals, and organized my days without anyone criticizing or controlling me. For the first time in years, I felt completely in charge of my life. Meanwhile, I heard from mutual friends that things at Daniel's house were falling apart. Without me managing the bills, organizing the home, and handling daily responsibilities, chaos had taken over. Rachel, who had stayed with him for a while, eventually moved out after taking even more money. The house that once seemed so orderly was now messy, and Daniel suddenly realized how much he had relied on me for everything. He started calling me almost every day. I didn't answer at first. When I did, he begged for forgiveness, apologized repeatedly, and asked for another chance. He claimed he had finally understood how badly he had treated me, how unfair he had been, and how much he had prioritized Rachel over me. But the truth was simple, it was too late. I had already moved on. I had already built routines, relationships, and independence that Daniel no longer had access to. His words, apologies, and promises could not undo the years of neglect and betrayal. It was clear to me that some lessons in life only come too late. Daniel had taken my patience, my love, and my presence for granted for years. By the time he realized the consequences, I had already stepped into a life where I could be respected and valued. I didn't feel bitterness or anger. I felt peace. Peace that came from finally reclaiming what had been mine all along, my dignity, my independence, and my freedom. Daniel had spent years choosing his sister over his wife. That choice cost him more than he imagined. Losing me was the price he had to pay, and there was nothing he could do to change it. I looked forward to the future, knowing that I had learned from the past. I had survived, grown stronger, and created a life where no one could control or humiliate me again. And that, more than anything, was the victory I had been waiting for.